Welcome to yet another edition of COVID-19. I'm Min Sun-hee. With the annual flu season just around the corner, authorities are calling on members of the public to get their flu shots this year to better protect themselves from the risk of tackling both the flu and COVID-19. On the subject of vaccines, we touch upon those for COVID-19 with our Kim Hanul later on in the program. Here first are the numbers on the pandemic with our Kwon So-ah. So I hear there's been a slight rise in our daily cases on this Wednesday.
Right, Sunny. It's not an exponential rise, but also no clear signs of slowing down as of yet, which is why authorities are calling on continuous cooperation, meaning social distancing and practicing personal hygiene.
Right now, officials would like to see the daily figures drop to the double digits, especially ahead of a number of scheduled agendas for this month, So-ah.
Exactly. Well, first off, beginning next Monday, schools in the metropolitan region will reopen, which also comes on the back of the downgrading of level 2.5 social distancing measures in the metropolitan region. And exactly 2 weeks from now, the 5-day Chuseok holiday will kick off, and raising concerns of renewed outbreaks, which is why authorities are asking the nation's people to not travel around if possible. And if we take a look at our map, we are still seeing infections in many corners of the country, and again concentrated in the metropolitan region. We had over 80 cases here, with 51 in Seoul, followed by 26 in Gyeonggi-do province. And we also had 8 imported cases as well as 105 local infections, which means the number of local infections has now surpassed 100 again. And it is also getting more and more difficult to detect the sources of infection. And in fact, as of yesterday, the proportion of untraceable cases in a span of 2 weeks stood at 25%, so 1 out of 4 cases. Now, following a steady downward trend, if we take a look at our graph, since last Friday, we are seeing a slight uptick here this Wednesday, but definitely much lower than the number we had last Wednesday. And with that, the total number of infections in the nation surpassed 22,500. What's good is that we did not report of a death this Wednesday, but what did change is the number of people in serious to critical condition, which stands at 160. And meanwhile, there are less than 3,000 people now in quarantine, and we have over 430 new recoveries. And now let's move over to the international figures. Over 29.7 million cases in total around the world, with almost 940,000 fatalities and some 21.5 million recoveries. And as for the countries with the highest numbers of infections, let's start with the U.S. with almost 6.8 million cases, and the death toll has surpassed 200,000. We will later connect to a student in the U.S. who has actually survived the coronavirus. India, meanwhile, has surpassed 5 million cases, with over 90,000 cases reported in just a day. And over in Spain here, resurgences continue, with the death toll having surpassed 30,000. Let's take a look at other places here. France reported around 7,000 cases in just a day, and almost all countries here until Italy have almost 300,000 cases or above. And those are the figures I have for now, but I'll be back with more updates after the government briefing. Sunny?
Right, so actually the government briefing has been cancelled indefinitely.
Right.
I'll see you tomorrow though.
See you tomorrow.
Right, so as I just said, the briefing for Wednesday afternoon has been cancelled indefinitely, but the briefings for Monday, Tuesday, Thursday and Friday remain in place until further notice. In other news now, securing supply has become the crucial task for countries worldwide, including Korea, amid the pandemic, especially on the vaccine front. Now, for more on this endeavor, I have our Kim Hanul here in the studio with me. Welcome, Hanul.
Good afternoon.
Right, so the plan here is to immunize 60% of the population, which will reportedly allow for herd immunity. Please tell us more.
Sure. So Prime Minister Chung Se-kyun announced yesterday that the government plans to supply enough vaccines for about 30 million people. And this is roughly 60% of the country's population. And what health officials hope is enough to secure a herd immunity. So out of these 30 million, 10 million will be acquired from the COVAX facility set up by the World Health Organization and Global Vaccine Alliance, Gavi. To get the 10 million vaccines from COVAX, Korean health officials have already submitted its applications to join this international alliance on August 31st. and they plan to send a letter of confirmation by this Friday. And the other 20 million will be acquired through deals with private companies. The government has taken a cautious approach in securing orders from private firms, and health authorities say they will ensure the acquisition of safe and effective vaccines in a timely manner.
오늘 발표된 코로나19의 백신
In line with the COVID-19 vaccine plans announced today, we'll prepare for the near future by executing our vaccination strategy in phases. As I mentioned before on numerous occasions, we'll make sure as many people get inoculated as possible with safe and proven vaccines.
Right, that is good to know. Hannah, meanwhile, where does Korea stand in the quest for a vaccine?
Well, globally speaking, Korea is quite behind in this vaccine race. More than 100 vaccines are currently being developed around the world, and some of the leading companies are actually wrapping up their phase 3 trials, while Korea just got the green light for phase 1 and 2 clinical research. So the truth is the path to a universal vaccine is neither simple nor cheap. On average, it takes more than 10 years and at least $500 million to develop a vaccine. As mentioned by Korea's top health officials earlier this month, Korea has not put in enough accumulated hours in vaccine research when Ebola plagued the world in 2014 and MERS outbreak hit Korea in 2015. Meanwhile, one Korean company that has made the most progress is Genexin, which began recruiting test subjects for its combined phase 1 and 2 trials back in June.
So given this particular reality, I suppose sourcing our supply of vaccines from overseas is the best option for now then. Hannah, please tell us more about such efforts then.
Sure. The health ministry said that they're working out some agreements with top 3 pharmaceutical giants. They're Pfizer, Moderna, and AstraZeneca. So it added that the local biotech company called SK Bioscience has already signed deals with AstraZeneca and Novavax to manufacture vaccines domestically and supply it to the Korean public. However, these vaccines come with a high price tag. In order to provide 30 million vaccines, the government will spend over 172 billion won, or roughly 145 million US dollars. The payment will be provided upfront to COVAX, and Korea will receive the vaccines when they eventually become available through the COVAX program. Also, Korean health authorities announced that vaccines from private companies will be selected based on safety, efficacy, price, and their expected timeline for commercial use. This means that acquiring multiple vaccines from different countries or companies will be likely.
I see. I also hear that one of the leading COVID-19 vaccine candidates may be available by the end of this year.
That's right. The top pharmaceutical giant, Pfizer, actually announced earlier this week that the company is preparing to distribute vaccines by the end of this year. So the CEO of Pfizer, Albert Bourla, added that there is a good chance the company will know whether its vaccine works by the end of October. Pfizer is one of 3 companies currently in the final stretch of clinical trials. The other 2 are Moderna and AstraZeneca. However, according to a leading U.S. infectious disease expert, things may not return to normal until the end of next year. Dr. Anthony Fauci says even though he's confident of a vaccine being ready by the end of this year or even early next year, it won't be until mid-2021 when the vaccine is fully mobilized and the majority of the population are vaccinated and protected. So I think that's something that we should keep in mind, even for people here in Korea. It may take some time until the vaccine becomes available.
I see. All right, Hannah, thank you for that coverage. I'll see you again next week.
See you then.
Right, it is a little after 2 o'clock in the afternoon here, but as I mentioned earlier, the afternoon briefing on COVID-19 on Wednesdays will not take place until further notice, starting from today, that is. Meanwhile, still on the local front, officials here have demonstrated resilience in the face of COVID-19 and have sought to come up with resourceful ways to deal with the problems brought on by the pandemic. In this next corner, we tell you about one such smart endeavor that seeks to offer commuters safe shelter.
Hi, this is Shin Se-byuk, and today we are going to visit a very special place, the box that you can see right behind me. And that facility is called the Smart Bus Shelter. And that shelter offers various services, and also provide safe and comfy rest areas to people. So why don't we just go ahead and find out more about that place? Now we're going to get in there and see what is inside. And in order to get in there, you need to go through temperatures checked. And as you can see, there are two cameras. The first one is for regular people, and the bottom one is for children and those with disability. So you can just stand here, right here, like this. As you can see, the door automatically opens once your body temperature is lower than 37.5 degrees Celsius. And this screen that you can see gives you real-time bus and subway information. And this screen on top of it is a surveillance camera, so you don't need to actually look outside which bus is coming. You can just simply look up and figure out your bus is coming. First and the most important thing, you need to sanitize your hand. Place your hand beneath the machine and it gives you the sanitizer, and you need to sanitize your hand. Number one, hygiene rule. And you can see there are outlets and even wireless charger here. So if you want to charge your smartphone, place your smartphone on here. And also the air inside is so cool and fresh and clean. And that is thanks to the air purifier inside here that is running 24/7. And also there is UV light sterilizer installed here. So which basically keeps you away from the virus. And this is so pleasant being inside here, and I guess you can spend your time more productive than just sitting outside and just waiting for your bus, right? This is the smart shelter that keeps you from the novel coronavirus and provides what you need while waiting for the bus. And what are people's thoughts about the shelter?
더울 때랑 추울 때 그리고 비가 올 때 편하게 버스를 기다릴 수 있는 점이 좋았고, 그리고 요즘 코로나가 너무 위험해서 언제 어디서 걸릴지 모르는데 공기 살균기가 있다고 하니까 안심하고 기다릴 수 있을 것 같아요. 실내에 있어서 버스 놓칠 수도 있을까 봐 걱정했는데 안쪽에서 음성으로 안내를 해줘서 좀 더 편리하고 좋은 것 같아요.
이용 인원을 5명으로 제한하는 부분도 되게 신경을 많이 써주신 것 같아서 좋았습니다.
경기도구청 통합운영센터에서 건넨 말씀드립니다. 코로나19 감염 예방을 위하여 마스크를 착용하여 주시기 바랍니다. 네, 감사합니다.
쉼터 내부에 이런 스마트 비상벨이라든지 IoT 시스템을 통해서 저희 성동구에서 운영하는 통합운영센터에서 실시간으로 원격으로 제어와 관리를 하고 있습니다. 그렇기 때문에 혹시라도 이 쉼터 내에서 비상 상황이 생기게 되면 저희가 신속하게 대응을 할 수 있는 장점이 있습니다.
Smart shelter is fully equipped with all those cutting-edge technologies, and that shelter indeed adds more convenience and safety to people's lives. Well, so far there are some 10 smart shelters in the district of Seongdong in Seoul, and we do wish that this kind of smart facility to be expanded nationwide in the near future so that people can have their lives much easier and safer. This has been 신새벽.
COVID-19 survivors say fighting the virus is the first challenge in a long battle of after effects that range from the physical to the psychological. Today we meet with a teenage survivor in the US for more on her plight amid the pandemic. I have Zaidlin Lush live on the line. Hello, Zaidlin.
Hi, and thank you for having me.
Right, well, first, it's good to know that you've won the first fight, Zaidlin. Let's begin with your infection then. When and how were you infected?
We don't actually know how I was infected, but I was infected on March 20th and was sick up until April 10th.
How are you feeling now?
I actually feel a lot better now. I've had my final check-ins. Everything looks perfect. Nothing looks like anything has damage.
I see. Zaidlin, tell us a bit about the treatment procedure that you went through once you found yourself infected back in March.
So originally when I was diagnosed with coronavirus, they had turned me down from 2 hospitals prior to actually admitting me into one. And then once they admitted me into the hospital, I stayed there for about 14 days. And meanwhile, I was in a coma after my first day being there, and then on 7 different types of medication until I pulled out my ventilator tubes.
How long were you in a coma for?
11 days.
That sounds really serious. I'm sure your parents were very worried about you.
Yeah.
Zaileen, how much did the treatment cost? Do you know?
$100,000.
Was there any financial support from the government?
No, not at all.
So this is all privately funded by you and your family?
Yes.
I see. That's quite a burden on many people there then.
Mm-hmm.
Zaileen, are you experiencing any after effects? Because we've had people talk about headaches, migraines. They've had people talking about skin issues, rashes. What is the case like for you?
I was actually losing a decent amount of my hair. My hair used to be fairly thick, and now it's very thin, and it still falls out a lot. I have trouble sleeping, and as well as like bright lights or loud sounds, they kind of catch me off guard.
I see. Do medical experts have an explanation for the hair that you're losing or the fact that you're easily startled by lights and sound?
Not as much that I know. They just explained that it was more of a PTSD thing, and it would be helped with like medical treatments such as like therapy, trying different medications, but nothing exactly that they could fix.
I see. Now, Zaileen, aside from the physical challenges of COVID-19, which themselves are very hard, of course, quite a number of survivors talk about the psychological hardships amid the prejudice of people in general. Has this been the case for you as well?
Yes, I did have a fair amount of my family, friends, people I knew not wanting to be near me or not believe that I was actually sick when I was. So once I was released from the hospital and finally able to come home and see my family, I had people just not believing it, which was kind of stunning that they would think it would be a lie.
Is it still the same right now? Are they still keeping their distance from you?
More people have been closer or less like scared of me now that they know that I'm actually okay and I've had final tests done. I'm not sick anymore. I have the antibodies, but so now they're less scared of me.
I see. Zaileen, have there been any tangible changes in your daily life patterns after your fight against COVID-19?
There have been a few. They're mostly staying inside. I don't really go many places besides work. But other than that, I don't do anything to just keep my family safe.
Zaileen, do you wear a mask when you go outside?
I do. I wear a mask as soon as I walk out of my house. I wear it when I drive. I wear it when I'm in the car. Anywhere that I am outside of my house, I wear my mask.
I see. Was it the case before the infection or not?
Yes, it was.
I see. Before you go, Zaileen, perhaps there's a message that you'd like to share with your peers worldwide in light of the pandemic then?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that miracles do happen. And I know that a lot of people are sick or scared of being sick. But even when I was sick and they told me that I wasn't going to live and told my family I wasn't going to live, I still did. And I'm okay now. And like miracles happen to the people that pray and hope that they will happen. And that's exactly what happened for us.
Right, Zaileen, thank you for those words. And thank you that you're healthy now and for making the time to join us live at this hour with your thoughts.
Thank you.
It is obvious that diplomacy depends a lot on human contact, and so we'll have a loss because of that.
Winds of change have been blowing into the diplomatic arena in the face of the global pandemic. And as proof of this, the United Nations General Assembly opened its 75th session virtually this week. For more on the new normal in the diplomatic endeavors, I have our Professor Kim Hyun-wook from the Korea National Diplomacy Academy. Welcome, Professor Kim.
Thank you very much.
And I also have Professor Im In-jung from Koongju National University. Pleasure to have you with us, Professor
Good
Im.
afternoon. Thank you.
Professor Kim, earlier on Tuesday, as I mentioned, the UN General Assembly began its annual session virtually. What implication does this endeavor have for the diplomatic arena?
Yes, you're right. The coronavirus situation has made the entire world to be decoupled in every aspect, country to country, people to people, and in all the aspects, like the transfer of people and the travel, in everywhere and everything, it's been decoupled. So I think one of the important aspects of the coronavirus situation is that there is a technology that we can overcome and challenge this decoupling situation in the world. So I think it may be called as diplomacy, plus diplomacy. This kinds of untact way of meeting and diplomacy, I think it's getting widespread. I'm not sure whether this kinds of type of meeting would also be very much available even after the end of the coronavirus situations. But I think for the time being, this is a very important, global phenomenon. And as you said, right, that the United Nations General Assembly is held untact this week. We had some previous situations of the United Nations General Assembly to be postponed because of some, events like a September 11th terrorist attack, postponed the meeting. But this is first time ever in the history of the United Nations to hold this untact meeting in General Assembly.
Indeed it is. Professor Im, in his opening remarks, the General Assembly President Volkan Bozkır asked UN member states to uphold multilateralism. He claimed that the context in which they are working stands as a reminder of the importance of a multilateral approach to issues such as collective world challenges, including the pandemic. What are your thoughts on these words?
Definitely. We have frequently said that, we live in the so-called era of globalization. Some or majority of the population experience that, again, the globalization. But through this, I'm sorry to describe like this way, but opportunity in a good sense, through this opportunity, almost all people in the world, I think, realize, again, real globalization. Again, we suffer together simultaneously, which means, or which suggests that we have to solve the problem together too. But the thing is, again, we have many other difficult realities in the international politics, but at least, again, I would say all of the people in the world realize this, again, the globalization, the effects of globalization.
Right. Professor Kim, despite the virtual opening of the 75th session of the UN General Assembly, Mr. Bozkır did point out that there is no substitute to meeting counterparts face-to-face to build long-term understanding. Is this perhaps a challenge that many host countries of international forums are faced with amid the pandemic?
Yes, I think we have a lot of global meetings scheduled this year after the United Nations General Assembly. And many countries and delegates come to the General Assembly meeting to talk about the agenda of those meetings and to have some sort of public diplomacy towards other countries, bureaucrats and relevant staffs. This is not happening. Usually, United Nations is a multilateral forum. But what happens is that inside the United Nations meeting, there are a lot of bilateral meetings going on, background meetings goes on. So these types of things that goes on along with the United Nations diplomacy is absent this year. Only the ones that needs to be there with key members, maybe presidents, keynote speeches or foreign ministers meetings. And other than that, there have been always something else, but all those things that were there as a background meeting is all absent this year.
I see. Professor Im, there are critics who claim that international organizations like the UN and the WHO have not really played their roles amid the pandemic. How do you respond to this criticism?
Well, there have been always controversies surrounding the effectiveness of any international organizations, but this year, especially WHO earned lots of criticism, as we all know. In some senses, I would say it's inevitable, or they might deserve those criticism, because actually its measures were not effective. It probably couldn't actually how would you say, overcome all this, state sovereignty issue. And at the same time, the Director General, he highly positively evaluated the measures of Chinese government, which earned more actually criticism, because we all know it actually started from Wuhan, China. So in some ways, they might deserve the criticism. But to be honest, I do think this reveals the reality, again, the G0 word. No actually country or no bloc has the ability or even willingness, political willingness, to take the leadership, global leadership, for the governance, universal governance, to fight with all these global scale challenges, including like climate change or pandemic, like today. We very painfully saw all this reality, I think. Mm-hmm.
Professor Kim, international forums including the G20 summit back in March and the ASEAN Regional Forum, which took place this past weekend, Saturday to be exact, were all held virtually. Would it be reasonable to assume that these platforms online simply provided member states with the opportunity to reaffirm their commitment instead of perhaps promoting any tangible agenda? Because I ask because you mentioned earlier that main meetings are usually supported by background meetings, but all this has become impossible because of the pandemic. In this scenario, what are your thoughts?
Yes, you're right. ASEAN Regional Forum meeting has held in virtual, style, and I think maybe the government position was to have a lot of other background meetings in IALF meetings. For example, maybe they needed to find someone who looks very promising at the time as a next Japanese prime minister. Now it's clear that it's, Mr. Suga became prime minister, but maybe South Korea might have been able to use the ALF meeting to have a previous contact with Mr. Suga in order for an improved relationship between Japan and Korea. And also ALF would have been a very good place to propaganda about our North Korea policies. I think the speech by North Korean personnel at ALF was something with no specific intentions. It was something about what's happening inside North Korea, what's the economic situations like that. So without background meeting, I think the meeting agenda and the outcome was very much ordinary, without much specific unique expectations.
Professor Im, now despite the limitations of virtual forums, do you see this trend as making a definite taking root, that is, as a definite diplomatic channel post-pandemic?
Yeah, absolutely. It already, I think, became the mega trend, especially in academia, intellectual society, or think tanks. Think tanks, worldwide privileged, powerful think tanks, they have been concentrated in few global political cities, like Washington, D.C. or New York. Seoul, well, we want to be, but it was not that easy. But thanks to all this, technological development or expansion of technological uses, these days, the think tank, regardless of its location, they can present anything, virtually. It's technologically very possible, very doable. It can reduce the physical cost, actually, including the travel expenditure, or we don't need to fight with the jet lag problem. probably if we go to Washington, 14 hours different. So all the things in a positive way, it also contributed, I think, to another emerging trend, and already I think it became the mega trend.
Right. So the virtual venue has essentially saved costs in terms of time and actual expenses being used to make these travels.
Yeah. Or protocol, security.
That's true. Security, of course.
Security of VIPs. I mean, it's another big issue, but it can reduce all those concerns and cost.
I see. Professor Kim, here on the local front, a major diplomatic event, of course, is the expected visit by Chinese leader Xi Jinping to Korea later this year. Now, Beijing's top diplomat Yang Jiechi reaffirmed the planned visit during talks in Busan late last month with Seo Hun, the director of national security at Cheongwade. What are your prospects on the planned visit by the Chinese leader to Korea?
I think now the corona situation and this kind of signifies some of the Chinese internal situations. Yang Jiechi's visit and possible Xi Jinping's visit to Seoul clarifies that now China have overcome the coronavirus completely, and by normalizing their diplomacy. This is a clear sign, signals to many countries that now China is ready to help other people with its know-hows of coronavirus situations, overcome. I think possible dates of Xi Jinping's visit to Seoul will be after the U.S. presidential election, because candidate Biden and President Trump's China policy is different. Now Trump's China policy is to take a look at the U.S.-China relations as ideological and systemic competition, very harsh policy towards China, making separate blocks in the world to sideline it to the United States or China. So this is becoming more and more like a zero-sum game. But I'm not sure about the Biden's policy. He looks very hardline, but also, he focuses on the cooperation with China at the same time. So I think after the presidential election, Xi Jinping's visit to Seoul will depend upon who becomes the next president and by which, what policy Xi Jinping will deliver to South Korea about the South Korea-China relations. But whoever becomes the next president, I think China's policy towards South Korea will be also very harsh. I mean, maybe China definitely wants South Korea to sideline with China. China would dislike the idea of South Korea becoming a Quad Plus member. So this is becoming a more and more important time and situation for South Korea's dilemma and diplomacy.
Professor Kim, I realize this might be a difficult question, but just out of curiosity, how do you believe Korea should seek to navigate the diplomatic environment amid tensions between Beijing and Washington?
Well, Vice Minister Choi Jong-un, clearly said that the baseline should be U.S.-South Korea alliance. We have enjoyed the diplomatic space between U.S. and China before, but that space is, getting smaller and smaller. Maybe we finally have to do some sort of decisions in every agenda, detailed agenda. And decision, I think, should be, based on the U.S.-South Korea alliance. If we choose China, alliance will be broken.
I see.
And I don't think that's something the South Korean government can tolerate.
Professor, back in June, President Moon Jae-in accepted an invitation, U.S. President Donald Trump's invitation to this year's Group of 7 summit. Now, the summit itself has been postponed yet again to after the November 2020 election in the U.S. Do you believe the summit will be possible this year?
It's very hard to actually predict. As Professor Kim said, we don't know yet. I mean, again, the result of the presidential election as one of the probably key variable that can change the situation. But if we think positively, I think it's a kind of good news. Of course, we have been proud of being invited and being included in this privileged group. But we also, at the same time, we didn't want to stimulate China unnecessarily. We don't want to make them uncomfortable, right? I mean, with being included or being excluding them, or Japan, obviously, they revealed their uncomfortable feelings as well. So in that sense, this necessary postpone was, I think we can accept it as a good thing.
Speaking just from Korea's point of view, what implication or what impact would such participation by the president in that meeting have for the country?
Well, South Korea is already one of the major powers in the world. Not only just economically, of course, we have all these divided situations with the North, confrontation with the North. We have many other domestic political problems too, but globally speaking, this is one of the major country, economically, politically, socially, culturally. You know, I think South Korea more than just deserve, again, being included in this kind of group. And I think South Korea definitely has to show more responsibility, more roles, leadership, not only just as a middle power, again, as one of the major power, I think we can do and we have to do. So in that sense, again, I'm more than just, just proud of this kind of, new situation.
Right. Professor Kim, the trilateral summit among Korea, China, and Japan, as well as the APEC summit, are scheduled for later this year. But their actual openings, of course, remain uncertain given the pandemic. What impact would the cancellation of these events have on Korea's diplomatic agendas in the long run?
Yes. South Korea, China, Japan trilateral summit. I think this year, the reason why that would be important is because of Japan-Korea relations. Now Japan has new cabinet, Prime Minister Suga, and I think everybody in South Korea, even though they have some anti-Japan sentiment because of a lot of historical issues, almost everybody in South Korea would agree that we have to talk with Japanese government. We need a talk, we need a dialogue, and without dialogue, this relationship will be worse in the future with no outcome. Because historical issue, that's something we have to settle in. But separately, the current relationship between two countries is very important for a trilateral security cooperation amongst the U.S., Japan, Korea. And that is getting loosened. And if that gets loosened, maybe from the United States perspective, South Korea is gearing toward China, which I think in the end, another Atchison line will be drawn between Japan and Korea. And that's something that we are losing, U.S. security backup to counter the Chinese influence in the Korean Peninsula. So that doesn't mean that we are in the middle of, mediating the fight or conflict between China and the United States. We just need some sort of balanced power in the Korean Peninsula. So I think, in that sense, I think a Japan-Korea relationship and restoring the relationship is very important for the South Korea's current national interests. And South Korea, China, Japan summit, I think in that sense is very significant chance for South Korea's diplomacy.
What efforts do you believe can Seoul make to engage Tokyo into dialogue in the reality that these events might be cancelled then?
Excuse me?
What efforts can Seoul make to better engage Tokyo in the case that these events are cancelled?
Well, I think, maybe other ideas can come up, but the U.S. role is very important now. During the Obama government, a lot of U.S. experts and bureaucrats visited South Korea to normalize the relationship between Japan and Korea, but there was none during the Trump government. So I think if Biden becomes the president, I think the U.S. mediation or interference between Japan and Korea to normalize the relationship, I think it will be much active than before.
I see. Professor Im, what are your thoughts on ways to better adapt to the new normal of virtual interactions in the diplomatic arena, even after the pandemic?
Again, now South Korean government is really trying to improve the skills, technological skills, or its own cybersecurity system. It's definitely one good thing. But I think South Korean society already showed the development. You know, look at the BTS, even before the BTS side, all these, you know, Korean pop stars, actually they earned their popularity through YouTube. Korean industry, Korean culture, or even K-quarantine, all the things actually already earned their global reputation, I think. So what we really have to do from now on is, again, we have to think about our leadership, our global responsibility, not just a small country. Again, as one of the big major economies and a responsible player, I think I hope we can show some good example, good sample. Again, cooperation between the government and the industry, or even the society or actor as well.
Right, right, Professor Kim. Adding on to what Professor Lim said, which is probably why Seoul's foreign ministry, I understand, has set aside 16.7 billion won, roughly about $14 million to establish the necessary infrastructure for non-face-to-face interactions next year. Now, it's clear that virtual forums are here to stay. How can we better respond to this reality?
Usually, we are using a lot of, programs like a Zoom, WebEx, or what else? All those programs that's made by the, just two-track companies. But one of the problems is that those programs are very fragile in cyber attack. Many cyber hacking or attack is possible when we talk and have an closed and unopened meeting. So I think that might be a much more serious problem for track one meeting, for example, government-to-government bureaucrats meetings. A lot of significant secrets would be discussed. Something should not be revealed to the people. So I think that's why they need to have some sort of, specific programs that has very strong, security measures vis-a-vis cyber attack or cyber theft. Maybe the United States already have it, and I think now South Korea government also thinks that we need one.
Right. Professor, one final question for you then. What are your hopes for Korea's diplomatic agenda in the future moving forward?
Again, we are somewhat entrapped in all this North Korean issue. I know I totally understand the situations and the reality, but again, as I repeatedly said, we can do more, and we can actually present the new agenda. This should be regarded as a global issue. That kind of, again, the presentation, proactive statement is, I think, definitely necessary for now.
Right. Professor Kim, a few words from you about Korea's future diplomatic agenda.
I think the biggest problem is how we have to handle the competition between US and China. Already, United Nations proposed the idea of Quad Plus already, and wants South Korea and Vietnam and New Zealand to be in the Quad Plus. China, I think, is perceiving Quad Plus as a multilateral military alliance in Asia, which China, I don't think, would be able to tolerate it. So this is another, choice moment. Samsung and SK already made a choice to be sidelining with the United States. They don't want to export their semiconductor to China despite the United sanctions. So all the detailed and government level, business level, and a lot of issues, choices being made already. So I think of those choices, there will be backlashes, by the United States to China. So that, I think, is something that we need to decide, and one of the big diplomatic tasks in the future.
Right. All right, Professor Kim, thank you very much for your thoughts. And Professor Im, as always, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
Right, well, that brings us to the end of Wednesday's edition of COVID-19. Do you tune in tomorrow at this hour as we touch upon China's declaration of an end to the pandemic in its country. In the meantime, do take care and see you tomorrow.